Hello everyone, and welcome back to my book review channel. I know this is not part of the usual update schedule, insofar as there is one, but a certain event has led me to decide that it is necessary for me to cover this book a bit sooner than I intended. A few days prior to the publication of this video, this man, Joachim Rönneberg, died at the age of 99. He was the leader of the mission that is the subject of this book, namely, to sabotage the efforts of the Nazis to use Norwegian resources to create the atomic bomb. Without this man, in all probability, the Nazis would have developed the atomic bomb first. He and his men endured the worst conditions that the Norwegian winter could throw at them. They were separated from their families, and they watched the atrocities committed by the Nazis in their homeland against their friends and loved ones. But they kept on with their mission, and in doing so, probably saved the world. Now, on with the review. I'm sorry for the unscripted format that this review is going to take, but I just felt it was necessary to get this out as soon as possible in order to maintain its relevance. This story, and I use this term story advisedly, and we'll get on to why in a minute, by Neal, Bascomb, an author and historian, is the story of how the Norwegian resistance and British intelligence decided to destroy the heavy water plant at Vemork in Norway. Heavy water was then a critical ingredient in the creation of nuclear fission because it basically is water with an extra, it's a water isotope with an extra neutron in the center that is super dense and is therefore good for slowing down uranium atoms so that they can split and form the critically important uranium-235 that's needed for a nuclear reaction and indeed a nuclear explosion. I apologize for any errors I made in describing the science of that there. My brain is a little fuzzy at the moment, but there we go. Anyway, the descriptions of the scientific background to the events of the Winter Fortress is probably one of the best features of this book. The scientists are every bit as much characters in the story, with their personalities and personal backgrounds, personal stories being described in every bit as much detail. The background in general and the descriptions of the war effort in Britain and indeed the conditions of the civilian population in Norway at the time are definitely the real reason to read this book. That is a definite plus. It is not just an action story. That being said, though, I use the term story advisedly because this is quite possibly the strangest historical book I have ever read. It is in many ways quite similar to a previous book that I reviewed, namely 1776, in that it tries very much to capture the widest audience possible by having the most open tone, but in that way kind of alienates the target demographic of the people who are really going to want to read it, namely the sort of amateur historians who do like a good bit of sort of academic posturing, shall we say, while also lacking the dialogue and exciting tone that you would need for some light reading as historical fiction. It is most definitely not historical fiction, which in some ways is to its detriment, but it is written as a narrative rather than as an academic book. You see, an academic book doesn't necessarily follow the precise timeline of events. This very much does. And it's written in the style of a novel with characters' reactions, characters' emotions, and I do say characters because they are written as such, even though they are real people. It's a very strange attempt because it also means that there's no dialogue either. If it were, it would be another historical fiction novel based on a true story, but it isn't. It's sort of halfway between the two, and that's its biggest weakness. Its structure and writing in a narrative style, its prose, means that it's often kind of hard to follow. It's kind of hard to remember who many of the people are. It's hard to tell how much time has passed in many ways. But that being said, it is incredibly effective at creating the atmosphere of these men who, for some of them, were out on the Vidda, the big Norwegian tundra, for months, surviving on nothing but reindeer meat, suffering from terrible malnutrition, and many other things, skiing hundreds of miles, and also portraying the atrocities committed by Nazis during the occupation of Norway. But the descriptions of the event itself are incredibly detailed, but then again, that also sort of is a disadvantage because the event itself kind of went off without a hitch. There was no gun battle, there was no pursuit. Put simply, there was nothing that sort of made for a Biggles book, boy's own adventure style, which is plainly what the author was going for. That being said, everything is wrapped up really nicely at the end. All the individuals, all the people, I should say, are given the endings that they require. And the book does delve into the necessary science of how the atomic bomb worked and how it was discovered, how fission was used, and how the idea for an atomic bomb existed in the 1930s and gradually entered into the military and indeed the public consciousness. I was struck by the emotional tone that comes from this book. This book just radiates the patriotism and the spirit of people who are under an occupation, the need for resistance. Ordinary civilians, not just involved in the massive raid, but even their willingness to put up with Allied bombings, such as the utterly pointless attempt to bomb Wehrmacht into destruction after the commando raid, while successful, didn't permanently stop the heavy water production. Finally, in the end, well, as we all know, history went a certain way. The Nazis were unable to develop the bomb, partly due to successful sabotage and partly also due to the infighting and inefficiencies of the Nazi regime. But this book is well worth reading, and as far as I can tell, it is the most in-depth analysis of this particular story. It reminds me rather a lot, and here's another nice little recommendation. The books by Craig Simpson. He's an author. I got a lot of his books because my grandmother is friends with his grandmother. And he writes a lot of stories about sort of historical fiction novels, generally for teenagers and younger audiences, though certainly not pulling any punches, about action in World War II. And most of his series are about the Norwegian resistance. It very much reminded me of that, in a good way. But I really do think that the book should have gone one way or the other, full academic text or historical fiction. This strange blend of the two was an ambitious attempt to create something entirely new, but it didn't really work out in the end, which is unfortunate, but that's the risk you take when you're on the cutting edge. I'd still recommend reading it though, certainly. This is definitely the best description you will find, as far as I know, at least in English, about this particular story. So seriously, go for it. Check it out. And yeah, so all I can say now is, once again, I hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment. If you have any suggestions, please leave them below. And if you'd like to subscribe for more book reviews, then please feel free to do so. And then all that remains is for me to wish you all happy reading. Until next time.